And it's time for another edition of Eye on the Issues. And today is a very special day. We are celebrating the 100th episode, and I couldn't think of a better guest than to welcome our very own Mandy Ludtke. She is the president and CEO of the Wyoming Liberty Group. Mandy, this is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. It's kind of fun to be on the other side of one of these interviews for a change.
I bet. You know, obviously we've done so many of these. They've been so interesting, all kinds of topics, as you can imagine. Tell us a little bit about why these have been successful and the importance of this being the 100th.
Oh, sure. Well, Wyoming Liberty Group has been around since 2008, so about 17 years. And I've been with the organization about 14 years. So I'm kind of like farmer's insurance. I know a few things because I've seen a few things. And over that time, we would occasionally film an event or a discussion. And then just kind of one day, the idea struck that maybe we should make this a regular thing. And, it's one thing to hear information that is being condensed and regurgitated by someone else, but it's a different thing to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So these interviews have been a huge hit, and we posted our first one in February of 2023, and it's been a regular thing ever since. And our guests have ranged from Wyoming lawmakers to nuclear experts, school teachers, and everything and anything in between. So I got to give you a big thank you, Mike, because without you as our host, we would not have achieved 100 episodes, and we certainly wouldn't be planning for our next 100. So you're a big part of the success, and thank you so much.
Of course, I love doing these interviews. I just think they're very interesting. They're very educational, and that's exactly what we want to do. And you said the organization started, of course, in 2008. Over those 17 years, can you give us an idea of what you've done as the Wyoming Liberty Group, what you've focused on?
Yeah, well, it's truly a mixed bag. In the early days, the organization was pretty instrumental in the Healthcare Freedom Amendment. And then we were also one of, if not the first voice in the state to really talk about education choice. And that issue is still near and dear to our hearts, especially now with everything happening with the ESA bill. We've also done a considerable amount of leading work on government transparency, as well as the concerns surrounding Medicaid expansion. And more recently, we've done work on marijuana policy and research and education on energy policy. And recently we released our Balancing the Scales energy report. And I would encourage anyone watching to check that out if they haven't seen it yet. It highlights the disproportionately high tax burden that oil and gas and coal face compared to renewable energy sources in our state. And I think we all know that dynamic exists, but this really puts the numbers on it, and it's pretty eye-opening. And in fact, this is a major issue that the Revenue Committee is tackling in the legislature. So that report is certainly making the rounds.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And yes, revenue, obviously, across the country in each state is a big deal. Now, something else we've covered fairly recently over the last 6 months to a year or so, a little bit more maybe, nuclear energy. This is a big deal. Tell us why you chose to tackle this one.
Oh, wow. Well, I certainly don't work alone. I have an amazing team behind me, and we make these decisions together. In the beginning, we sat around the table, and just amongst ourselves, we discovered that opinions really varied a lot. We had people totally in favor of anything nuclear, and others so anti-nuclear, you almost needed a new word for it. But most of the group sat somewhere in the middle, not quite sure what to think. And then when we started to talk to folks outside the organization, even legislators, we learned that a lot of people were in that boat. Some to the extreme one way or the other, but most in the middle. So we said, we got to take it from there. And if you didn't know enough about nuclear, what would you need to know or learn so that you could figure out how you felt about it? And we took reasonings from both extremes, researched them, broke them down. And if you go through our materials, I think you'll find all the information that you need to help you form your own opinions.
And our interviews are not just followed locally in Wyoming, especially, for example, our nuclear interviews. They're getting attention really across the country, and maybe even across the world.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, it's been really rewarding kind of to watch that conversation unfold, and to see so much of our research and materials becoming such an active part of everything. Nuclear it's certainly not a new issue in Wyoming. People have talked about it for decades, but mostly in the background. That changed in 2020 when Governor Gordon and the legislature began openly exploring nuclear as part of the state's all of the above energy strategy. And then in 2021, the momentum really took off when TerraPower and Pacificor announced that Kemmerer was going to be the site for the Natrium demonstration project. And, that decision really locked nuclear into Wyoming's future energy conversations in a way that it never had before. And at the same time, a lot of people here didn't believe the nuclear conversation would ever actually really move forward because it never had before. So when those announcements and pieces of legislation started coming, it caught a lot of folks by surprise. And I think that's why you're now seeing so much more engagement across the state. Things got real very quickly this year when bills began dropping and nuclear companies started showing up in communities to test the waters. And to your question, Mike, that's where I think our work has really made a difference. By putting research and reports and interviews into that public square, we've really helped move nuclear from this backroom conversation to a more statewide discussion. And we're ensuring that people, whether it's lawmakers or business leaders or just everyday Wyoming people, have the tools to ask better questions and make informed decisions instead of just relying on these carefully packaged industry talking points.
After all the research and the interviews that we've done on nuclear, is there something you think that it would be shocking for our viewers to learn that they might not know about this whole concept?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would have to say that it's probably it's important for people to keep in mind that at its core, it's not a political issue, even though it's used as political cannon fodder at every turn. But when you strip this down to the basics, this is really a personal values issue. It's about what kind of Wyoming we want to leave for the next generation and the countless generations that are going to come down the road. Do we want to rush headfirst into playing host to these unproven technologies just because they're exciting and money's being tossed around and kind of the scent of opportunities in the air? Or, do we want to stick to the foundational elements that good governance was built on? And that's transparency and accountability and respect for the principles of the free market. Individuals or lawmakers encouraging Wyoming to kind of take pause and really ask some hard questions. That doesn't make somebody anti-progress or change their political affiliation. It just makes them pro-common sense and pro-Wyoming. And here's a reality I think people need to confront. And that's nuclear undeniably creates power, but it also creates a byproduct, and that is spent nuclear fuel. And that's not speculation, that's fact. And in the short term, how to store it safely is still highly debated. But in the long term, the best idea that humanity has ever come up with in any country is to dig a big hole and bury it. And knowing those byproducts will last thousands and thousands of years. And as human beings, we're not really capable of fully understanding that. We're lucky to live 80 or 90-ish years, right? And that's barely a speck in time compared to spent fuel. And this is what leaves a lot of folks asking, is this really the best we can do? And, how do we in good conscience not only move forward, but move forward with significantly more nuclear projects that are going to produce nuclear fuel at a much higher rate than we currently do. And all the while knowing that we haven't addressed the long-term issue with the thousands of metric tons of spent fuel we already have sitting around. And some people like to say, well, reprocessing is the answer. Just look at France. But the truth is reprocessing hasn't proven to be a fix-all. In France, the reprocessing plant there has been tied to some pretty well-documented radiation releases into the English Channel, and studies have shown higher rates of leukemia in the nearby populations. So even after decades of reprocessing, France still has tons of high-level waste, and they need a geological repository. So they haven't solved the long-term storage problem, they've just changed its form. And that's a reality I think people don't often hear about when reprocessing kind of gets pitched into the mix as the silver bullet. And people have other good reasons to be concerned. We're living in an age where nuclear certainly, the uncertainty of it is in the news pretty frequently. In July alone, an earthquake off the coast of Russia triggered fears at Fukushima, and it forced an evacuation due to a potential tsunami threat. And then we also learned about multiple radioactive wasp nests in South Carolina at the Savannah River site, which is a former nuclear weapons production facility. And most recently, folks will probably have heard about this, the FDA confirmed that the radioactive isotope cesium-137 was found in at least one sample of frozen breaded shrimp, and that triggered Walmart to pull the products from their shelves and issue a recall. So these incidents, they remind us that once radioactive material is out in the world, it doesn't politely stay put. It does what the laws of physics demand. It moves. And so after all of that, to come back to your question, Mike, what really stands out the most to me, and what I think people really need to think hard about, is that while nuclear can undeniably produce power, the waste it leaves behind is unlike anything else humanity has ever created. It lasts longer than recorded history, and the best solution we've come up with is to bury it and hope for the best. And that should stop every one of us in our tracks, because at the end of the day, the power is temporary and the money is temporary, but that waste, that's forever. And that reality needs to shape every decision that Wyoming makes as we go forward. And all of this is before we even touch on the economics of it. Nuclear has never penciled out all over the world and throughout US history. It's always been propped up by taxpayer dollars. And that's not a free market. And it's another serious factor Wyoming needs to weigh. And there's one more piece that often gets overlooked, and that's the sovereignty. If Wyoming passes legislation allowing reactor manufacturers to store their spent fuel on site, federal law requires that oversight transfers to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And at that point, it's no longer Wyoming citizens calling the shots, it's Washington. So if we don't like what these companies are doing, we can't fix it ourselves. We would have to petition the NRC, an agency that some would say has a long history of serving industry interests first and citizen complaints second. So that means once we give up that control, we don't get it back. And that too is something every single one of us needs to think long and hard about. And, we also can't forget that priorities and objectives, those can change from administration to administration. So we don't know what the future would hold.
That's a very good point. And the fact that this is not at the forefront of a national conversation right now that is getting a lot of attention, to me is a shocker, because the fact that we've had, as you said, decades of nuclear powered nuclear waste, and there has yet to be a solution that is really, long term. We're really just it's like baby steps, and we're just kind of trying to, as you said, bury it and then hope for the best, right?
Yep. Yep.
All right, so let's talk about some of the past episodes, if we can, of Eye on the Issues. Which ones have been the most popular, and if people have any ideas going forward, how can they share them?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, we've had some really amazing interviews. When it comes to nuclear, I would say Dr. Gordon Edwards, as well as Professor Ramana, both from Canada, were extremely popular. We also welcomed former Wyoming legislator Eli Bebout, who has been a leader in Wyoming's kind of nuclear ambitions, and people were very eager to hear his take. We've worked hard to try and feature conversations from people from all sides of the issues that we work on. And, a while back, we were blessed to have Congresswoman Harriet Hageman join us. That was right before the 24 presidential election. So needless to say, that interview was very popular. We also just recently sat down with the superintendent of public instruction, Megan Dagenfelder, and she highlighted all of the amazing work that her office is doing, as well as an update on the ESA situation. And, we've also been fortunate to have guests from all over the country, and even guests from different countries join us to speak on the issues. So I could go on and on about all the amazing guests we've had, but if anyone would like to see past episodes, all of them are available on our website at wyliberty.org. And if people want to submit interview requests, which we love getting, by the way, just give us a call or shoot us an email. To call us, that number is 307-632-7020. And if you want to send us an email, just send it to info@wyliberty.org and let us know.
And what can people expect from the Wyoming Liberty Group in the months ahead?
Well, we've got some exciting things coming up. One I'm really looking forward to sharing is our next major report, which takes a hard look at campaign finance in Wyoming. It's called No One's Buying Wyoming Elections. And it's a pretty candid look at a decade of campaign finance disclosure. And the research shows that the biggest spender only wins about half the time. So that really changes the narrative that our elections are being bought. And I think people are going to find it pretty eye-opening, especially as some are pushing for restrictions on political speech. So watch for that coming soon. We also released our Wyoming Policy Compass, and that is a tool for evaluating whether policies help or hurt the people of Wyoming. So kind of like a real compass, it keeps us oriented and ensuring that we stay on course towards a greater freedom and prosperity rather than shifting towards bigger government or special interest influence. So be sure to watch for several new Policy Compass analysis pieces that are going to be coming soon. And we'll, of course, be continuing our work on the policy issue surrounding the proposed legislation to allow the nuclear reactor manufacturers to store their spent nuclear fuel on their sites. And we'll continue to monitor the situation with ESAs. And we'll also be speaking at a variety of community groups that have invited us to present around the state. So we love getting out and speaking with people. And if you're a member of a group that would enjoy hearing more about the issues we work on, let us know. We would be happy to come and speak to your group.
And if people are out there and they want to support the Wyoming Liberty Group, what can they do?
Yeah. Well, we welcome everyone to participate in our work, and we deeply appreciate and we need the support. The work we do is crucial to our state, and it truly takes a village to make all of this happen. We could not do this without the support of our members. So if you believe in keeping Wyoming free and independent, then I would invite you to join us. Again, that web address is wyliberty.org. And if you go on the top of the homepage, simply click on Get Involved and select donation/membership. And all of that information that you would be looking for can be found on that page. But if web pages of information are not your thing, that's totally fine. Just give us a call, and each and every member of our team would be more than thrilled to speak with you and hear more about what interests you. And again, that number is 307-632-7020. And I would also encourage everyone, make sure you're on our newsletter list. To sign up for that, there's an easy spot right at the bottom of our homepage. So just look for the little envelope icon that says newsletter, and a place to enter your information will pop up, and we'll get you added to that list. And I should also mention that members are included on our physical mailing list, which means you'll be getting our Wyoming Liberty Review magazines that we send out, as well as special invitations to events and things like that.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to finish with this question. What do you like most about the state of Wyoming?
Oh, yes, you always ask this one. I love this question. I think a lot of people say their favorite thing about Wyoming is the people and their self-sufficient spirit or the beauty of the landscape. And I agree with all of that. But I think as a born and raised Wyoming country girl, for me, it's something a little different. I think folks from rural Wyoming especially have a deep appreciation for kind of the peace and the beauty and the reward that comes from our way of life. And, we can look out over the open prairie and we can see the natural purpose of the land. And, we're at peace with the idea that not everything is for sale and not everything has to be developed. And sometimes it's okay to appreciate what we have and defend the lifestyle that we've all chosen. not everybody needs a coffee shop on every corner or this dazzling nightlife scene with 40 different restaurants. But, a lot of us in Wyoming, we just kind of like it the way it is. And the best way maybe I can explain it is with a good movie reference. Do you remember the old 80s film, The Great Outdoors, with John Candy and Dan Aykroyd?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a scene where they're sitting on the porch of the cabin and they're kind of looking out over the lake. And Dan Aykroyd asks, why anyone would want to be in such a no man's land. And John Candy just kind of shakes his head and he says, you wouldn't understand. And that it's special because of the memories and the peace it brings. And he wants his kids to have that same experience. And Dan Aykroyd just sees it as an untapped resource. And he says, it could produce billions in forest products and serve as radioactive waste storage, and there's development opportunities. And, I think to me, a lot of us in Wyoming, we're kind of like John Candy in that moment. We understand how special what we have is, and how people all over the country dream about what surrounds us every single day. And sometimes we take that for granted. And I think I'm proud that so many Wyoming people are willing to defend that. And even when it feels like others want to sell or develop every inch of prairie they can, that spirit and that recognition of what we already have, I think that's probably what I love the most.
Very nice. All right. Well, Mandy, thank you for taking the time and sharing your thoughts. It was nice to see an inside look as to what the leadership of the Wyoming Liberty Group is thinking as we move forward.
You bet. Anytime.